Hello viewers, welcome back to Bite Al-Asad, House of the Lion. And today we're going to be discussing some concepts of archery in Persia and other parts of the Middle East and its application to the theory of combat archery. Now, this is kind of a modern term that we get associated a lot with things like archery tag, right? Fantasy fighting. There's the stealth archer in video games, right? Fighting close quarters with the bow. That's something that gets confused a lot with fantasy, but holds some premise and historical reality. And it's reflected in the equipment and armament of a lot of warriors from the Middle East and Central Asia. So it's not quite fantasy, but it's also not quite as straightforward as one might think that it is. Right, so the first thing we want to talk about here are the roles of different military units. This is broadly speaking on the battlefields of armies of Persia and the rest of the Islamicate world. I'm speaking from a very Persian perspective because of my favoritism with Persia and the empires that ruled it, and also because of my former training with Razmusfar, I can speak more from the Persian sources and more from those perspectives than I can mostly anything else. So we have to remember is, yes, Persian warriors and maybe earlier versions of the Faris were multi-class, so to speak. They weren't just heavy cavalry, they weren't just horseback archers. They could dabble in a lot of different things. The elite were trained for a lot of different things. But that doesn't mean that in certain areas auxiliary units weren't used or specialty units weren't used. And much like in Europe, specialty units may not have necessarily had full armor, may not necessarily have had full equipment. They may not necessarily have had all the things that an elite warrior would have used, especially archers, right? So archers needed to prepare themselves, and not just light mounted archers, but also foot archers, because they did exist in a lot of Islamic armies. And they were an important role, right? You had to have infantry archers to counter a lot of other things. Now, because of this, their equipment and the way they were outfitted really served to both protect themselves defensively, but also switch offensively if need be. So first, to kind of help frame this, I'm going to put on my hula hood here, which is an open face helmet. Here, right? Yes, there were heavy armored infantry and cavalry who did use these types, but I'm using the open face here as just kind of a broad analogy or allegory for what archers might have to work with, right? Maybe they had, and certain manuscripts actually show them with open face helmets and bazubans and a kaftan. Not a ton of other extra armor, but just some vital stuff, right? Whether that's to help keep them mobile, maybe they couldn't afford it, or that's all they needed for their position. But what really comes in handy is the application of holding a shield with your bow, right? So what I have in here is my Persian Kalkan shield. It's modeled after a shield from the Victoria and Albert Museum. These shields were not just found in Turkey. They're not just Turkish shields, but there's some from Persia. They were used in India. They're all over the place. Mine's a specifically Iranian example that I had based off of a museum piece. So with these shields, you often had a few different strapping systems. Your center grip and a forearm, which allowed you to use it like your standard shield and to use your main hand weapon. But you also had these forearm straps that you could bypass the center grip and then hold it like this. And what this allows you to do is to actually grip your bow in your shield hand. And now, if you're mounted, you're riding, you could shoot, recover. If you're on the retreat, you could do your back shot, cover yourself as you're riding, right? This allows this. But when you're on foot, right, and you're in formation, your positions, you're shooting, you can still fire the way you normally need to with this. And if you're worried about other bowmen, maybe other mounted archers returning shots at you, you fire and release, and then you can still recover, protecting your vital area, protecting your face, which is an open helmet, maybe covering your chest, which isn't as covered, right? And it does not inhibit your ability to shoot. And what's really neat about this is you actually have the ability, once you fired, to then kind of tuck behind and still draw an arrow and reload and recover and fire. I don't have this strapped on perfectly right now because I have to take it on and off, but you get the point. Now, the next part I want to mention that leads into combat archery, so to speak, is when enemies close distance and the archers need to discard their bow. What happens next? Well, this is where offhand weapons really come into play, right? If you've got anything else on you and the bow has been discarded, now you're able to shift the shield down and recover to its center grip. And then once this happens, now maybe you pull your hanjar and you're set with some kind of offhand weapon to fight against oncoming infantrymen. So you're not completely helpless. So this style allows you to shoot on the go, have a platform to hide behind, right? But it also gives you the opportunity to defend yourself so you're not completely useless, right? A lot of European archers might have a small buckler or an axe on their side or a dagger, not uncommon. But here with this style of shield, you've got much more protection, and it's available to you for much larger amounts of coverage. So it's a similar concept, right, that you've got in Europe, but this allows a bit more mobility. So now your archers can very effectively transition to more infantry if needed. So that was just my quick little overview on the effects of and the usage of combat archery with instinctual shooting. So if you have any comments below, any questions, please leave them, and we will see you next time on Bite Al-Asad, House of the Lion. Thank you.